The oppressive heat of late May clung to the sprawling rural outskirts of Celandia, a humid shroud over cracked earth and stubborn scrub. Dust devils danced across the unpaved roads, a perpetual motion mirroring the unease that had begun to settle over the scattered farmsteads. It was within this simmering stillness that the night had fractured, not with a bang, but with a series of brutal, guttural sounds that no amount of rural quiet could absorb. The silence that followed was not one of peace, but of profound absence, a void where laughter and the everyday sounds of family had been. Blood, dark and viscous, painted a grim tableau across what had been an ordinary kitchen floor, the remnants of a life brutally extinguished. A family, a bedrock of this close-knit community, was gone, their existence erased with a savagery that spoke of a deep, unfathomable rage. The air, thick with the metallic tang of violence, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable sirens that would shatter the fragile peace, signaling the arrival of those tasked with picking through the ruins of lives. Detective Isabella Rossi, her face etched with the weariness of too many such nights, surveyed the scene, the crimson stain a stark contrast to the pale yellow of the walls. The air in the small house was heavy with the scent of spent gunpowder and something else, something primal and unsettling. Beside her, Sergeant Mendez, his usual gruff demeanor softened by a grim respect for the sheer brutality of the act, pointed a gloved finger towards a shattered window. The entry point. It was too clean, too precise for a random act of violence. This was calculated, deliberate. The initial reports painted a picture of a professional, chillingly efficient, yet the sheer ferocity of the killing suggested something more, a visceral eruption of depravity that defied easy categorization. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through Isabella's hand as she adjusted her grip on her notepad. She had seen enough to know that the immediate aftermath of such a crime was a fragile ecosystem of grief, shock, and the nascent tendrils of fear, a fear that could easily morph into a paralyzing panic if not managed with swift, decisive action. The questions began to form, not in words, but in the sharp, insistent rhythm of her pulse. Who could do this, and why? What twisted logic fueled such an explosion of violence? The answers, she suspected, lay not just in the physical evidence scattered across the floor, but in the darker corners of the human psyche, in the unseen currents that drove individuals to such monstrous acts. The wind outside picked up, rustling the leaves of the sparse trees with an almost mournful whisper, a somber prelude to the storm that was about to break. As dawn's weak light began to filter through the broken panes, casting long, distorted shadows across the blood-soaked floor, the immensity of the task ahead began to crystallize. This was not just a crime scene. It was the epicenter of a burgeoning nightmare. The victimology, a young family with no apparent enemies, no history of involvement in anything that would warrant such a targeted annihilation, only deepened the mystery. The meticulous nature of the entry, the almost surgical precision with which the lives were extinguished, suggested a perpetrator who was both skilled and disturbingly detached. Yet, the sheer savagery of the aftermath, the overwhelming violence, painted a picture of an individual teetering on the edge of absolute barbarity. This dichotomy, this jarring blend of cold calculation and primal fury, was a red flag, a warning that this case would not follow a predictable path. Forensic technicians moved with practiced efficiency, their every movement deliberate, cataloging the silent testimonies of the scene. A dropped shoe, a overturned chair, a single, muddy footprint that seemed impossibly large, too deep in the soft earth near the shattered window. Each artifact was a fragment of a shattered narrative, a piece of a puzzle that threatened to consume whoever dared to assemble it. The air, still heavy with the stench of death, now also carried the faint, metallic tang of a desperate search for answers, a hunt that would soon draw in the vast resources of the state. The initial sweep of the immediate surroundings yielded little beyond the unsettling echo of what had occurred. The dense, unforgiving scrubland surrounding the farm, a natural buffer against the encroaching city, now presented itself as a formidable obstacle, a silent accomplice to the perpetrator's escape. The forest, a labyrinth of tangled vines and ancient trees, seemed to swallow the sounds of pursuit, its leafy canopy a natural cloak for those seeking to disappear. The absence of any immediate witnesses, the remoteness of the location a double-edged sword that had offered the killer sanctuary but denied investigators crucial early leads, began to gnaw at the edges of the developing investigation. Detective Rossi felt the familiar knot of frustration tighten in her stomach. The clock was ticking, and with every passing hour, the trail grew colder, the perpetrator bolder. The whispers among the responding officers, a mix of hushed awe at the brutality and growing unease, hinted at the larger implications of this act. This was not merely a domestic dispute or a robbery gone wrong. This was something that struck at the very heart of community safety, a violation that reverberated far beyond the immediate tragedy. It spoke to a vulnerability in the very fabric of rural life, an illusion of peace shattered by an unfathomable darkness. The first real break, if it could be called that, arrived not from the forensics lab or a hushed confession, but from a flickering, grainy surveillance camera mounted on a remote roadside stall miles away. It captured a fleeting, almost spectral figure, moving with an unnerving fluidity through the pre-dawn gloom. The figure was gaunt, ragged, carrying a makeshift bundle, its movements betraying a desperate, primal urgency. It was a ghost of a person, a shadow flitting across the edges of civilization, yet the sheer persistence of its movement, the unwavering direction, suggested a clear objective: escape. This fleeting image, digitized and amplified, began to paint a more unsettling portrait of the killer, one that hinted at a past of hardship, of a life lived on the fringes, a life that had perhaps already been steeped in violence and evasion. The mere fact that this individual was able to navigate the dense wilderness with such apparent familiarity was itself a disturbing revelation. The initial assumption of a localized, impulsive act began to crumble, replaced by the chilling realization that they were dealing with someone who understood this unforgiving terrain, someone who had likely prepared for this very eventuality. The terror that had been confined to the immediate scene began to spread, an insidious contagion carried on the wind, amplified by the growing unease among the scattered rural population, who now felt exposed, vulnerable, their isolation no longer a source of peace but a terrifying liability. The manhunt was about to become a chase across a vast, untamed wilderness, a pursuit of a phantom that was as elusive as it was brutal. The sheer scale of the ensuing operation was unprecedented, a testament to the chilling effectiveness of the initial crime and the profound fear it had instilled. The Federal District, a region usually defined by its ordered, urban landscape, now found itself engaged in a desperate hunt that spilled into the dense, sprawling forests that bordered it, a wild frontier that held its secrets close. Hundreds of officers, a formidable force armed with the latest technology, fanned out across the rugged terrain, their presence a stark contrast to the quiet solitude that had once characterized these areas. Helicopters buzzed overhead like persistent insects, their powerful rotors churning the air, casting fleeting shadows on the dense foliage below. Drones, equipped with thermal imaging and high-resolution cameras, became the eyes in the sky, attempting to pierce the natural camouflage of the wilderness. The air thrummed with an almost palpable tension, a collective anxiety that permeated every radio transmission, every hushed conversation among the boots on the ground. Tracking dogs, their keen senses honed for this very purpose, strained at their leashes, their owners whispering urgent commands, coaxing them towards any scent that might betray the fugitive's presence. This was no longer just a police investigation. It had become a national obsession, a gripping drama unfolding in real time, played out against the backdrop of Brazil's rugged, unforgiving natural beauty. The fugitive, a phantom moving through the shadows, had transformed a localized act of unimaginable violence into a widespread spectacle, a source of both terror and morbid fascination for a nation watching with bated breath. The fugitive's passage through the wilderness was marked by a series of audacious incursions into the lives of unsuspecting rural inhabitants. These were not random acts of desperation, but calculated seizures of resources and temporary sanctuary, each encounter leaving a trail of bewilderment and terror. Farmhouses, once havens of rural tranquility, were transformed into fleeting stages for harrowing confrontations. He moved with an almost spectral stealth, appearing seemingly from nowhere, his presence a violent rupture in the ordinary rhythm of agricultural life. The invaded properties bore the silent testament to his passage. Ransacked pantries, vehicles commandeered with chilling efficiency, and perhaps most disturbingly, the palpable fear left behind in the eyes of those forced to confront him. These were not mere opportunistic raids. They were extensions of his flight, each act of intimidation and theft a desperate attempt to fuel his prolonged evasion, a testament to his resourcefulness in the face of overwhelming odds. The psychological impact on these isolated communities was profound, as the sanctuary of their homes was violated, replacing a sense of security with a gnawing vulnerability, the wilderness that once protected them now a perceived threat. Furthermore, the fugitives' interactions with law enforcement were characterized by a startling ferocity, a willingness to engage in violent confrontation rather than surrender. Each encounter was a desperate gamble, a high-stakes game of cat and mouse played out across the unforgiving landscape. Gunfire erupted unexpectedly from the dense undergrowth, the sharp crack of weapons shattering the natural quiet, turning tranquil pastures into battlegrounds. These firefights were not prolonged sieges, but brief, intense exchanges, the fugitive seemingly adept at melting back into the wilderness once his objective, evasion, was achieved, leaving behind stunned officers and the lingering scent of gunpowder. The sheer audacity of his resistance, the willingness to engage armed officers directly, spoke volumes about his mindset, a potent cocktail of desperation, cunning, and perhaps a nihilistic disregard for his own safety or that of others. The manhunt escalated from a pursuit into a relentless campaign, each reported sighting triggering a surge of activity, a wave of officers converging on a location only to find the quarry had once again vanished, leaving behind only the echoes of his violent passage and a growing sense of national unease. Building on this, the fugitive's past began to emerge, a complex tapestry woven with threads of criminal activity and unsettling accounts of a quasi-mystical aura. Stories circulated, whispered with a mixture of fear and morbid fascination, of his alleged connection to esoteric practices, of a perceived ability to evade capture through supernatural means. This folklore, amplified by the fear gripping the populace, began to imbue him with an almost mythical quality, transforming him from a mere criminal into a boogeyman figure, a phantom that stalked the edges of society. This layer of perceived mysticism, whether rooted in fact or fabrication, significantly heightened the psychological stakes of the manhunt. It fed into the public's anxieties, blurring the lines between tangible reality and the realm of the uncanny, making the pursuit all the more urgent and, for some, deeply unsettling. The narrative surrounding him shifted, from a straightforward manhunt for a dangerous individual to a struggle against a force that seemed almost beyond the ordinary comprehension of law enforcement, a force that played by its own unwritten, terrifying rules. Consequently, the intense 20-day pursuit transcended a mere police operation, morphing into a national spectacle, a gripping drama broadcast across every available medium. Social media platforms became conduits for a torrent of information, speculation, and outright rumor, each post, each shared image, adding another layer to the growing legend of the fugitive. He became an obsession, a focal point for public anxiety, his image plastered across screens, his movements tracked with an almost voyeuristic intensity. This constant digital amplification, while undoubtedly aiding in disseminating official alerts, also created an environment of pervasive fear and misinformation, transforming a local tragedy into a nationwide obsession. The fugitive, whether he knew it or not, was a reluctant celebrity, his notoriety exceeding any rational measure, a testament to the power of media to both inform and sensationalize, to magnify a criminal act into a cultural phenomenon that captivated and terrified millions. This pervasive media presence underscored the unique challenges of modern law enforcement, where the pursuit of justice now unfolds under the unblinking gaze of a global audience, every action scrutinized, every rumor amplified. As the relentless pursuit neared its inevitable zenith, the intricate mosaic of fear, folklore, and the stark reality of law enforcement's extensive capabilities began to coalesce into a singular, charged atmosphere. The dense, verdant expanse that had served as both sanctuary and battleground for so long now seemed to hold its breath, a silent witness to the escalating tension. The stories, once disparate whispers on the wind, now intertwined, forming a narrative that stretched the boundaries of the conceivable, weaving myth into the very fabric of the chase. This confluence of the primal and the technologically advanced, the ancient rhythm of the forest against the persistent hum of surveillance, underscored a profound transformation in the nature of the hunt itself. It was no longer solely about apprehending an individual. It had become a national focal point, a crucible in which societal anxieties were reflected and amplified, a testament to the pervasive influence of shared narratives in shaping perception. Reflecting on this journey so far, one can discern a growing convergence of investigative rigor and the emergent, almost mythical, persona of the pursued. The very act of tracking a single individual across such challenging terrain, utilizing an arsenal of modern technology against the backdrop of an ancient landscape, highlighted a curious symbiosis. The persistent efforts of hundreds, the constant drone of aerial reconnaissance, the tireless dedication of those on the ground, all pushed towards a singular point of convergence, an unavoidable conclusion to this prolonged struggle. The interwoven threads of the fugitives' past, the escalating panic in rural communities, and the relentless digital echo chamber collectively sculpted a national consciousness, a shared experience of tension and morbid curiosity that transcended geographical boundaries. In light of these insights, the path towards resolution, though fraught with the inherent uncertainties of such a high-stakes confrontation, began to feel more defined. The relentless pressure, the constant state of alert, the sheer logistical undertaking required to maintain such an operation, all pointed towards an imminent climax. The wilderness, which had so long concealed and facilitated the evasion, now seemed poised to reveal its secrets, its vastness perhaps becoming an inadvertent trap rather than a shield. The collective focus, honed by days of intense media coverage and public engagement, now anticipated the final act, the inevitable turning of the page that would bring this extraordinary chapter to a close, leaving behind a profound ripple effect. The intricate tapestry of events, woven from threads of violence, evasion, and public fascination, was reaching its final, decisive stitch, preparing to reveal the complete, albeit somber, picture. The humid air, thick with the aftermath of a relentless pursuit, finally began to thin, carrying with it not just the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke, but the profound weight of a narrative's end. For 20 tense days, the vast, untamed spaces between Celandia and Aguas Lindas de Goiás had been more than just geography. They had been the crucible where a fugitive's desperate flight met the unyielding force of organized pursuit. This sprawling manhunt, a monumental undertaking involving hundreds of officers, sophisticated technology, and the collective anxiety of a nation, had finally converged on a single, fatal confrontation. The image of a lone figure, cornered and defiant, etched against the backdrop of the rugged wilderness, represented the culmination of an extraordinary, terrifying chapter. The cacophony of sirens and the urgent crackle of radios fell silent, replaced by a somber stillness that allowed for the first tentative breaths of reflection. This was not merely the closing of a criminal case. It was the punctuation mark on a complex story that had burrowed deep into the national consciousness, a story where the stark realities of crime, the pervasive tendrils of fear, and the potent allure of myth had interwoven to create a spectacle that transcended the ordinary. The death of Lázaro Barbosa de Souza, while officially declared the result of armed resistance, ushered in a new phase of discourse, one that probed the edges of what transpired in those final, violent moments. Questions lingered, not only about the circumstances of his demise but also about the very nature of the operation itself. The sheer scale and intensity of the manhunt, broadcast and amplified through the instantaneous reach of digital media, had transformed a local tragedy into a national obsession. This event served as a stark, undeniable demonstration of how swiftly and powerfully a single narrative can captivate and unsettle an entire populace, blurring the lines between factual reporting and the sensationalized accounts that feed on fear and fascination. The rural communities, once perceived as bastions of quiet isolation, were thrust into the harsh spotlight, their vulnerability laid bare, exposing the deep-seated challenges of ensuring security in vast, sparsely populated regions. The echoes of this intensive pursuit resonated, prompting a necessary, if uncomfortable, examination of police conduct, the ethics of media coverage, and the very fabric of justice in an age where every dramatic event becomes a global spectacle. Ultimately, the story of Lázaro Barbosa de Souza endures not just as a chronicle of a brutal criminal and an exhaustive manhunt, but as a potent lens through which to view the intricate interplay of societal anxieties, the enduring power of myth in the digital age, and the complex realities of justice. It is a testament to how quickly a fugitive can become a phenomenon, how fear can morph into obsession, and how the pursuit of a single individual can illuminate broader societal vulnerabilities. The wilderness, a silent witness to the violence and the chase, now holds the memory of a time when an entire nation held its breath, captivated by a drama that was both horrifying and profoundly human. The true practice of understanding, of learning from the complexities of such events, begins now, in the quiet reflection that follows the storm, in the ongoing dialogue about security, media, and the enduring quest for truth and accountability in a world that is perpetually watching.